Truth is making a comeback. America's Top Stories with Lisa K. Donner.
Panera, the ultra-successful maker of overpriced bread, has finally learned after 9 years the economic principle, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. So writes economic correspondent Andrew Moran. And in a way, Panera's failure at giving free lunches and freebies is a teachable moment regarding socialism and why it never has and never will work. Joining me now to discuss the Panera Bread debacle is Liberty Nation's Andrew Moran. Dare I ask how cold it is in Toronto today, sir?
Well, I know I use this joke a lot, but it's so cold outside that I saw an old man's teeth chatter in the glass jar.
Okay. For those who are not familiar with Panera's economic and social experiment, can you give our viewers a synopsis of the program here?
Yeah, so Panera Bread, it's that company that bakes overpriced bread. You get a loaf and it costs you $10. They launched a series of Panera Cares. These are restaurants established in Boston, Portland, and Dearborn, Michigan, and they have a pay-what-you-can business model. So customers, they go to the restaurant, they order what they want, and then they pay whatever they wish. So they could pay nothing at all, they could pay more than a fair share, or they could pay just a few bucks.
So they tried this in different regions of the country, from Portland to Chicago to Boston, and in every instance, Panera Cares failed miserably. Why?
Well, as anyone could predict, it failed because it was only able to recoup about 60% of its total costs. Now, if you run a restaurant, that's something to sneeze at. So they were unable to pay for the food, the leasing, the labor, and everything else that is involved with owning and operating a restaurant. And so what the issue was, according to local reports, when customers would visit the restaurant, they would mob it. So they would order as much as they could. The homeless, they would frequent the restaurant for every single meal they needed. And then, of course, patrons would just pay only a few dollars for one of these expensive meals.
And you mentioned students, too.
Correct. Yes, students, they would go there to study, they would go there to use the internet, and then they would just order whatever they wanted. And what was interesting was the entitlement when management, when they would try to act and inform them that they were abusing the system. All these reviews online were saying, oh, they were so rude, and how dare they tell us, how dare they turn this place into a toxic environment. It's quite absurd because they're doing actually a generous thing of giving, you order, let's say, a burger and you pay what, $1 for it or nothing at all. I mean, you should be pretty grateful for such a business model.
So you write in your article about the tragedy of the commons. Can you put that into the context of what happened to the Pilgrims? So
when the Pilgrims landed in America, they established communal farming on the suggestion of the man who funded the Mayflower. He was a wealthy iron merchant. And so what happened was you had public property, and all the farmers, they would converge onto this land and they would overgraze it. So the land eventually became unfit to use and unfit to cultivate. And then when the land became unfit to cultivate, people would starve. So, and then also they would steal from their neighbors. They would eat crops that were unfit to eat. And then the other issue was that people would be lazy. They wouldn't work. So when there was land to cultivate, they wouldn't do it because they would rely on their neighbors or friends or their brothers, wives, cousins, best friend to help feed them.
So what can we learn from the Pilgrims and Panera Bread? What is our teachable moment here?
Well, I think in the context, it's the same thing that happened at Panera. So Panera, they offered, let's say, free food for everyone, and people would go to the restaurant and just take whatever they could. They wouldn't care about if the company was able to sustain its business model, and they would be indifferent to if the company would survive in a few years. They just focused on getting what theirs right now at that very moment without thinking of the consequences. So eventually the model had to shut down, and the very last one, which was in Boston, no longer exists. So this good business model no longer exists because people, they abuse it, and that was Panera's tragedy of the commons.
Thank you. That's Andrew Moran from LibertyNation.com reporting from Toronto. Thanks so much for joining us, Andrew.
Thank you.
Truth is making a comeback. Visit us at libertynation.com.